Excuse me, what are you doing? That's not true, it looks like you're eating all of your food again. We were saving that for midway through the episode. Don't lie to me, Ludo. Lying is bad. Or is it? Could it be good sometimes? Yeah, I know, but how else am I going to start this episode? So, we all know lying is bad. But in games, we lie to our players constantly, and I'd argue that that's to the player's benefit. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that we do this everywhere, from manipulations of difficulty, AI, all the way to simple interactions with the user interface. We're going to cover all of them, but let's start with the basics. Because players can jump to a lot of conclusions based on any form of information we present to them, whether they're right or wrong, this can lead to them quitting out of frustration, so it's up to us to corral their minds in the right direction so they never even reach this point, and sometimes that involves lying. So to start us off with a simple example, let's look at loading screens. So you see these bars here? Well, they're not real. Well, they're not one for one. They're a rough approximation of the data being collated. This is done to give players some semblance that something is happening, because if they weren't here, the player would assume that the game had maybe frozen when they're actually doing important back-end tasks to set your game up. So these bars are just there as a suggestion, but to be honest, we don't really need the bars. All that matters is that something is throbbing. Yeah, you heard me right. These little moving thingies, yeah, they're called throbbers. They're the simplest way for devs to signify that a process is in progress. And this is also why you commonly see slowly zooming images of hunky, stoic NPCs here too. They truly do be throbbing. Kind of like our players' brains, because let's be real, you're all idiots, myself included. We all make mistakes through misunderstandings or lack of skill, which inevitably kills us, and we don't really want our players to die, as we covered in our last episode on death as a mechanic, so we want to manipulate the playing field so it appears as though the odds are stacked against our players, but in reality, they're way safer than they think. The most common ways we do this is with logarithmic or gradient health bars. We've covered this twice before, Ludo. Okay, I'll give a brief summary. Well, imagine that there's a gradient over the top of the health bar itself. Players take larger amounts of damage towards the top, but as their health bar dwindles, they take less and less damage, allowing them to stay in this adrenal state of panic for longer, regardless of their mistakes. We want the players to get low and feel as if they're barely scraping by with the skin of their teeth, but this is all a manipulation. This is done a lot in fighting games, but also a majority of action games like Assassin's Creed or FPS games like Doom, regardless of whether you can see a health bar or not. But regardless of all of this, sometimes players just die. It can't be helped, but even here we're lying. You might select one difficulty at the beginning of the game, ready for the challenge, but if you repeatedly die, we just adjust the variables of enemy health, aggression, and even entire difficulty settings in the background to find a sweet spot that keeps you in this flow state. And this was perfectly seen in all 56,000 versions of Resident Evil 4. Yeah, that's a good question. We've seen what we do when players are struggling, but what do you do if the players are too good? Well, we just cheat. This all started with arcade games where they would alter the play conditions to favour the player failing as playtime progressed to try and squeeze as much money out of players as they could. But this is extremely obvious and feels like actual lying rather than these ickle baby white lies, so nowadays it's all done under the table. What are you doing? Oh, you feel hungry, do you? Well, you shouldn't have eaten all your bloody food then, should you? We don't have any more, we can't afford it. You've got an ad to play. What the fuck does that mean? Oh, Jesus.
This video is brought to you by Game Maker, the free, fast, and easy-to-use 2D game engine that helps power modern classics like Undertale, Hotline Miami, and Hyper Light Drifter. Starter templates, official asset bundles, and a wealth of tutorials are available to help bring your ideas to life. And you can export and share your game for free on all non-console platforms. But you don't have to take my word for it, I'm just some jerk. We have an actual bona fide Game Maker on hand.
Oh shit, that's me. Yes, I've been using Game Maker for a long time. It's probably the most powerful and easiest to use engine for making 2D games out there, suitable for both amateurs and hardcore coders, and with all the Steam and console integration stuff for when you're ready to start monetizing your hobbies. I used it to make my recently released game, Starstruck Vagabond, which has already delighted thousands of sci-fi cozy game aficionados thanks to Game Maker being so bloody great.
Head on over to the Game Maker link in the description to begin your game development journey today.
Oh my god. Oh, you happy now? Okay, yeah, well thanks to the patrons and the sponsors for keeping Ludo fed. Wait, what were you talking about? Oh yeah, because standard game AI can't compete with human skills while on the same playing field, they have to cheat. Racing games will rubber band their AI racers to stay within certain positions to keep the race exciting for slow players or allow them to push their vehicles to impossible lengths to catch up with skilled players. First-person shooter AI literally has wall hacks to better track the player and not to waste computational resources on them actively searching for you. They just feign this search. Real-time strategy AI is the worst for this. At their higher difficulties, they cannot compete with players' macro or micro skills, so they cheat by giving themselves resources and build times that the player could not hope to achieve. It's all smoke and mirrors. The information being presented to you as concrete is actually this putty that's barely holding itself together to try and keep up or keep you playing. If everything was as binary as it seemed, it would feel garbage. For example, random chance. Be it with chances to hit or dice rolls, these are all manufactured in service of the experience. Because true randomness is unpredictable, who'd have thunk it? And players don't like this. Well, they think they do, but I'm telling you now, if you were to miss an attack 10 times in a row on a 95% chance, mate, you would probably fucking quit. Quick sharp. So instead, we skew the odds, and XCOM being the most famous example of this in motion. On lower difficulties, the player gets this hidden bonus that's added to their chance to attack, so their actual hit chance is about 10 to 15% higher than what is actually displayed. And then, for the next 2 subsequent missed shots, another 10% chance to hit is invisibly added to give them a much higher chance of succeeding. This is all done to manufacture a specific experience of tension while also avoiding prolonged frustration based on factors that's out of the player's control. And Mario Party does something similar too by seeding their dice rolls before the match has even begun to give this even distribution of rolls to keep things fairer. See, even in the most chaotic of games, there are these invisible systems that are trying to keep their players engaged, because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is how you feel during play, not what is actually happening. In Dragon Age Inquisition, there were these engine limitations that meant they couldn't render their environment quicker than they already were, so your horse's sprint function does sweet fuck all. It doesn't increase your speed at all, but the effects that they used make it feel like you're moving faster, so does that matter? In narrative games, we use a bunch of tricks called divergences to make players feel as if they're making meaningful choices, but in reality bringing them right back to the same conclusions regardless. Full episode on that over here, and by the way, I'm sorry about my mistake with Kim. At the end of the day, it matters how the player feels during the journey we take them on, not the objective truth of the information or systems that they're playing with. But with all of this lying, why do players rarely notice it or even care? Well, players will attribute their own meaning and interpretations on data we present to them, whether it's true or not, and this can swing both ways. How many times have you been playing with a friend who thinks they're hot shit and they get absolutely bodied? They'll blame the game, the room temperature, or their milk to Pepsi pilk ratio before owning up to any kind of personal fault. In psychological terms, this is called situational attributions, where we blame the undesired outcome on things that are out of our control. On failure or death, players will commonly blame the game itself or their hacking opponents first before any kind of self-reflection takes place. So as developers, we want to minimize the amount of situational attributions a player could possibly throw our way with blaming the game, because that's how players quit, so we lie for their benefit, and players never notice this, because they tend to receive information that is presented in their favour and attribute it to themselves rather than any kind of outside factor. This is the self-serving bias, where players will attribute any form of success to their own accomplishments or ingenuity, rather than looking at it for what it is, which is it being handed to them on a silver fucking platter. We don't want to acknowledge that our hands are being held. We want to live out those power fantasies, conquer impossible odds, and as long as it feels as such in the moment, does it really matter that we're being lied to? But what do you think? Have you ever noticed a game lying to you, and does the fact that we use these smoke and mirrors change your motivation to play? I think there are many schools of thought here, so let us know down below because we would love to discuss this with you. Alright Ludo, time to say goodbye. Alright, see you in the next one guys.